The night I found the eviction notice taped to my door, I made a promise to my sleeping 5-year-old daughter that I'd die before I'd let us become homeless. I just didn't expect that promise to be tested by the man who'd been silently watching me fall apart for months. My name is Sarah, and I used to believe in fairy tales. Now I believe in alarm clocks set for 4:30 a.m. and the metallic taste of fear that lives permanently in my mouth. 3 jobs, 3 uniforms, 3 different versions of myself that I slip into like armor every single day, fighting a war nobody sees. At 5 a.m., I'm Sarah the waitress, coffee-stained apron, aching feet, serving breakfast to men who tip in loose change while discussing stock portfolios. The diner smells like bacon grease and broken dreams, and I've memorized every crack in the vinyl booths where I used to bring Emma for pancakes when things were different, when we were still a family. By noon, I transform into Sarah the cleaning lady, invisible hands that scrub away other people's messes in glass towers where I once worked in a corner office. Sometimes I catch my reflection in those pristine windows and barely recognize the woman staring back. She has my face, but her eyes hold an exhaustion so deep it feels ancestral. When evening falls, I become Sarah the checkout girl, scanning groceries I can't afford, bagging items I dream about buying, watching families purchase in one trip what I earn in a week. Emma colors quietly in the break room during my shifts, her homework spread across a plastic table, growing up too fast in fluorescent lighting. But here's what I didn't know as I fought to keep us afloat. Someone had been documenting every stumble, every desperate moment, every time I counted coins for gas money in my car. Someone who saw me not as 3 different employees, but as one woman drowning in plain sight. The man who ordered black coffee every Tuesday at the diner, always polite, always distant. The same man whose office I cleaned every afternoon, who'd sometimes work late and nod when I emptied his trash. The quiet customer who always said thank you when I bagged his groceries, who Emma once waved to from the break room. He owned everything. The diner, the cleaning company, the grocery store. My entire universe of survival belonged to him. But the night I found that eviction notice, the night I was ready to beg strangers for help, he left something on my doorstep that changed everything. A single photograph of me from 5 years ago, standing in a cap and gown, holding Emma as a baby, smiling like the future was full of possibilities. On the back, in handwriting I should have recognized, that didn't, were 4 words that stopped my world. I remember her too. The thing is, I'd never seen this man before 3 months ago. At least, that's what I thought, until I saw that photograph and realized that sometimes the people who save us are the ones we've forgotten we already knew. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever fought battles nobody sees, if you've ever wondered whether someone out there remembers who you used to be before life broke you down and built you back up differently, this story is for you. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances and forgotten connections. Share your own moment of unexpected hope in the comments, because sometimes our angels wear business suits and wait years to reveal themselves. Subscribe, because what happens next will remind you that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the words, "I remember you." And trust me, you need to know why he had that photograph. The photograph trembled in my hands like a living thing, its edges worn soft from handling. I stared at the woman in the cap and gown, her face radiant, unmarked by the lines that now creased my forehead like worry itself had taken up permanent residence there. Emma slept fitfully on our threadbare couch, her small fist clutched around a broken crayon, and I wondered if she'd ever see me smile the way that woman in the photograph was smiling. I remember her too. The words echoed in the silence of our cramped apartment, each syllable carrying weight I couldn't yet understand. Who was this man who claimed to remember the person I used to be? More importantly, why did looking at my younger self feel like staring at a stranger? I turned the photograph over again, studying the handwriting with the desperation of someone trying to decode their own life. The letters were careful, deliberate, the kind of penmanship that belonged to someone who chose their words as precisely as they chose their actions. But familiarity danced at the edges of my consciousness, just out of reach, like trying to remember a dream upon waking. The eviction notice lay crumbled on our kitchen table, its red lettering a brutal countdown to homelessness. 30 days. In 30 days, Emma and I would be on the street unless I could somehow produce $800 I didn't have. I'd already sold everything of value: my college textbooks, my grandmother's ring, even Emma's bike that she'd outgrown but still loved. Sleep eluded me that night as I replayed every interaction with the mysterious coffee-drinking, trash-can-nodding, grocery-thanking man. His face remained frustratingly vague in my memory, like looking at someone through fogged glass. Yet something about him had always felt careful, intentional, as if every polite nod and quiet thank you had been measured, weighed, considered. The darkness pressed against our windows, and I found myself walking to Emma's makeshift bed on the couch, watching her chest rise and fall with the innocent rhythm of someone who still believed in tomorrow. Her father's absence had carved a hole in both our lives, his sudden departure leaving us financially and emotionally shattered. But looking at this photograph, I realized there were other holes in my memory, gaps I'd attributed to stress and exhaustion. The darkness pressed against our windows, and I found myself walking to Emma's makeshift bed on the couch, watching her chest rise and fall with the innocent rhythm of someone who still believed in tomorrow. Her father's absence had carved a hole in both our lives, his sudden departure leaving us financially and emotionally shattered. But looking at this photograph, I realized there were other holes in my memory, gaps I'd attributed to stress and exhaustion. Who had taken this picture? It wasn't a formal graduation photo. The angle was too intimate, too personal. Someone had captured a private moment between a new mother and her infant daughter, someone who'd been close enough to witness my joy, my hope, my absolute certainty that the future held nothing but possibilities. I traced Emma's sleeping face with my fingertips, marveling at how she'd grown from that tiny baby in the photograph to this resilient little girl who did her homework in grocery store break rooms without complaint. She deserved better than this liminal existence between survival and surrender. The photograph had awakened something in me, not just curiosity about the man who'd left it, but a fierce longing for the woman I used to be. That woman had dreams beyond counting coins for gas money. She had ambitions that stretched beyond simply making it through another 18-hour day. She believed in love, in possibility, in the idea that hard work and hope could build a life worth living. But now, holding this tangible proof of who I'd been, I had to confront an uncomfortable truth. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped fighting for that life and started simply fighting to survive. The question that haunted me as dawn approached wasn't just who had left this photograph, but whether that hopeful woman in the cap and gown was someone I could ever find my way back to again. Tuesday arrived with its usual cruel precision. At 4:30 a.m., my alarm sliced through dreams I couldn't remember, and I slipped into the first of my 3 uniforms, like donning battle armor. The diner uniform, polyester that held the smell of other people's breakfasts and my own exhaustion. Emma stirred as I kissed her forehead, her eyes opening just enough to mumble, "Love you, Mama," before sleep reclaimed her. Mrs. Rodrigo's next door would wake her for school in 2 hours. Another small kindness I couldn't afford to pay back, but desperately needed to accept. The morning air bit at my skin as I walked to the diner, the photograph tucked safely in my apron pocket like a talisman. Every step felt different now, charged with the possibility of recognition. Would he be there? Would I finally see past the careful politeness to whatever lay beneath? The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed their familiar tune of industrial loneliness. I tied my apron, started the coffee, and tried to quiet the voice in my head that whispered today would bring answers I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. At 7:23 a.m., I'd begun noting the exact time of his arrivals. The bell above the door chimed. My hand stilled on the coffee pot as he entered, and for the first time in 3 months, I really looked at him. Tall, probably mid-30s, with dark hair that suggested he ran his hands through it when he was thinking. His suit was expensive but not flashy, the kind of understated wealth that whispered rather than shouted. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath. Gray-blue, like storm clouds, and when they met mine across the diner, I saw something flicker there, recognition, certainty, and something that looked almost like pain. He chose the same booth as always, sliding into the vinyl seat with practiced ease. But this time, when I approached with the coffee pot, my hands weren't steady. "Black coffee," I said, because it seemed important to speak first. "Please." His voice carried a warmth I'd never noticed before, or maybe I'd been too tired to hear it. "Sarah." The coffee pot nearly slipped from my grip. He'd never used my name before. I started, then stopped, unsure how to ask if someone was a ghost from your past when you couldn't remember the haunting. "I wasn't sure you'd recognize me," he said quietly. "It's been a long time." The diner suddenly felt too small, too bright, too full of possibilities I'd stopped believing in. Other customers needed service, but the universe had narrowed to this booth, this moment, this man who somehow held pieces of my forgotten life. "The photograph," I whispered, sliding it from my pocket. "You took it." "Graduation day," he confirmed. "You were so proud, holding Emma like she was your greatest accomplishment. You said that she was my whole world," I finished, the memory surfacing like something rising from deep water. I remember someone being there, but the face is blurred," he said, understanding. "Trauma can do that, create gaps, protect you from memories that might hurt too much to carry." My legs felt unsteady. This man, this stranger who wasn't a stranger, knew about trauma. He knew about Emma's father leaving. He knew things about my life that I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten they existed. "What's your name?" I asked, though part of me feared the answer. "Michael," he said, and the name hit me like recognition and heartbreak combined. "Michael," he said, "I have to work," I interrupted, panic clawing at my throat. The memory was there, just beyond my reach, and the shape of it terrified me. "I can't, not here." He nodded, understanding flooding his features. "I'll wait," he said simply. "I've been waiting for 5 years, Sarah. I can wait a little longer." The cleaning company's supply closet became my sanctuary at noon, a cramped space between mops and industrial bleach where I could finally breathe. My hands shook as I changed into the gray uniform that made me invisible to the executives whose offices I cleaned. But invisibility felt like a luxury now. Michael's eyes had seen too much, remembered too much, awakened too much. "What's your name?" I asked, though part of me feared the answer. "Michael," he said, and the name hit me like recognition and heartbreak combined. "Michael Chen. I have to work," I interrupted, panic clawing at my throat. The memory was there, just beyond my reach, and the shape of it terrified me. "I can't, not here." He nodded, understanding flooding his features. "I'll wait," he said simply. "I've been waiting for 5 years, Sarah. I can wait a little longer." The cleaning company's supply closet became my sanctuary at noon, a cramped space between mops and industrial bleach where I could finally breathe. My hands shook as I changed into the gray uniform that made me invisible to the executives whose offices I cleaned. But invisibility felt like a luxury now. Michael's eyes had seen too much, remembered too much, awakened too much. Michael Chen. The name rolled around in my mind like a marble in an empty jar, creating echoes of something I'd deliberately forgotten. 5 years. He'd said he'd been waiting 5 years, which meant he knew me before Emma's father destroyed everything, before the bankruptcy, before the eviction notices, before I learned that love could disappear overnight like steam from a bathroom mirror. His office was on the 37th floor. I knew this because I cleaned it every Tuesday and Thursday. Had he arranged his schedule around my shifts? The thought made my skin prickle with awareness that felt dangerous and necessary in equal measure. I stepped off the elevator, rolling my cart of supplies like I was wheeling my secrets behind me. The executive floor always felt different, hushed, powerful, insulated from the desperation that lived in places like diners and grocery stores. The carpet was thick enough to muffle footsteps, and the windows offered views of a city that looked manageable from this height. Michael's office door stood slightly ajar, and I could hear the low murmur of his voice on a conference call. Something about quarterly reports and expansion plans, the language of a man who controlled things, who made decisions that affected hundreds of lives, including mine. I cleaned around him like I had dozens of times before, but everything felt different now. The way he glanced up from his papers when I emptied his trash can, the careful distance he maintained, as if he was afraid of overwhelming me, the way his presence filled the space even when he wasn't speaking. When his call ended, silence stretched between us like a taut wire. "You don't remember me," he said finally, and it wasn't a question. I paused in my dusting, my back to him. Pieces, fragments, like trying to remember a movie I watched while falling asleep. "We were friends," he said carefully, before everything fell apart. Friends? The word tasted foreign in my mouth. When had I last had a friend? When had I last had time for friendship, for anything beyond survival? "You used to laugh," he continued, and his voice carried a sadness that made my chest tighten. Not the polite laugh you give customers, but this sound like surprise and joy had collided. You'd throw your head back and laugh like the world was exactly as wonderful as you'd hoped it would be. The spray bottles slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. "Stop. You had dreams," he pressed on, and I could hear him rising from his chair. "You wanted to open your own business, event planning. You said you wanted to help people celebrate the best days of their lives because you believed everyone deserved to feel like their happiness mattered." Stop. But the word came out as a whisper because the dream was surfacing now, rising from whatever grave I'd buried it in. Sarah Hartley Events. I'd even designed a logo, practiced my pitch in the mirror, researched small business loans. "What happened to her?" Michael asked, and his voice was close now, too close. "What happened to the woman who believed in happy endings?" I turned to face him, and the question that had been building in my chest finally escaped. What happened to the man who knew her? The pain that crossed his features was immediate and raw. "He made the biggest mistake of his life," he said quietly. He let fear convince him that he wasn't good enough for her happiness. He thought he was protecting her by walking away, but he was just protecting himself from the possibility of not being enough. The office suddenly felt airless, like all the oxygen had been sucked out through the floor-to-ceiling windows. This man hadn't just known me. He'd loved me, and somehow, some way, I'd loved him back. But loving and leaving seemed to be the only constants in my life, the only things I could count on. Have you ever had someone love you so completely that losing them felt like losing pieces of yourself you didn't even know existed? The grocery store's break room had never felt smaller. Emma sat at the plastic table, her math homework spread between us like a bridge between her childhood and my unraveling. She worked with the focused intensity of a child who'd learned that homework time was sacred, one of the few constants in our ever-shifting world. "Mama, you look sad," she said without looking up from her multiplication tables. At 5 years old, Emma had developed an intuition about emotions that sometimes frightened me. She could read my moods like weather patterns, adjusting her own behavior to compensate for whatever storm was brewing in my chest. "Just tired, baby." The lie tasted bitter, but what could I tell her? That I was remembering a version of myself she'd never known? That there was a man who claimed to love that woman, and I wasn't sure if she still existed? The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical lullaby as I slipped on the red polo shirt that marked my final transformation of the day. Sarah, the grocery clerk, the most visible of my invisible selves, the one who smiled and asked about your day while scanning items I couldn't afford to buy for my own daughter.
Michael appeared in my checkout line at 8:47 p.m., carrying a basket with exactly 3 items: a carton of milk, a loaf of bread, and a package of the chocolate chip cookies Emma loved. The cookies I'd caught her staring at longingly last week, the ones that cost more than I could justify spending. "Did you follow me here to buy my daughter cookies?" I asked as I scanned the milk. "I followed you here to remember what it felt like to take care of someone," he said quietly. "I forgot after I lost you. I forgot what it meant to notice what someone needed." My hands stilled on the bread. Other customers waited behind him, but the universe had contracted again to this moment, this confession, this man who seemed to collect my broken pieces like they were treasure. "You didn't lose me," I said, the words surprising us both. "You left me."
Yes, he admitted, and the honesty hit harder than any excuse would have. I left you when you needed me most. When Emma's father walked away, when everything fell apart, when you needed someone to believe you could rebuild, I wasn't there. The cookies scanned with a beep that sounded like punctuation on years of regret. Why? "Because I was afraid," he said, and his voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent years examining his own cowardice. "Afraid I'd fail you like he did. Afraid I'd make promises I couldn't keep. Afraid that loving you meant risking the kind of destruction I watched you go through when he left. So you left first." The words came out flat, matter of fact, because this was a story I'd lived before in different variations. "I thought I was being noble," he said, and a laugh escaped him that sounded like broken glass. "I thought disappearing would save you from another disappointment. I was 28 years old and convinced I was protecting you from myself." The register displayed his total, but neither of us moved. And now? Now I'm 33, and I've spent 5 years building a life that means nothing because the person who made it meaningful wasn't in it. His eyes held mine with an intensity that made my chest tight. Now I know that fear isn't noble, it's just fear. And I know that watching you struggle while I could help was the opposite of protection. I bagged his groceries with hands that had learned to function despite emotional earthquakes. Emma doesn't need another man who'll decide she's too much trouble. Emma needs someone who sees how extraordinary her mother is, he said. Someone who remembers that her mother once believed in happy endings and wants to help her remember that those endings are still possible. A sob caught in my throat, sudden and unwelcome. The cookies sat in the bag between us, such a small gesture that somehow contained years of longing, regret, and tentative hope. "I don't know how to trust again," I whispered. "I don't know how to deserve another chance," he replied, "but I know how to try. I know how to stay this time." Emma appeared at my elbow then, having finished her homework and come to find me. She looked up at Michael with the frank curiosity of childhood, and he knelt to her eye level with a gentleness that made my heart crack open. "You bought my favorite cookies," she said, pointing at the bag. "Your mom mentioned you liked them," he said, which was a lie that felt like truth. Emma looked between us with the wisdom of a child who'd learned to read adult undercurrents. "Are you going to make Mama smile again?" she asked. Michael's eyes found mine over Emma's head. I'm going to try very hard to do that. Sleep had become my enemy. I lay in the darkness of our small apartment, listening to Emma's steady breathing and the distant hum of traffic that never quite stopped in our neighborhood. The photograph lay on the nightstand beside me, that woman in the cap and gown seeming to mock my current existence with her radiant certainty. Memory had begun returning in fragments throughout the day, each piece cutting like glass as it surfaced. Michael at my graduation party, bringing flowers because he said I deserved to be celebrated. Michael helping me move into my first real apartment, the one with windows that caught morning light. Michael holding Emma when she was 3 weeks old, the first person besides me to make her stop crying just by being gentle. How had I forgotten him so completely? The answer lived in my chest like a stone, because remembering him meant remembering who I'd been with him, And that woman had been too painful to carry through everything that came after. The eviction notice crinkled as I picked it up. 27 days remaining until Emma and I would be homeless. Michael owned my entire universe of survival, yes, but he also owned the power to end our suffering. The thought made me sick with a complexity I couldn't untangle. Gratitude and resentment, hope and suspicion, need and pride all twisted together into something that tasted like surrender. I'd been strong for so long, surviving on fumes and determination. But strength, I was learning, was sometimes just fear wearing a different costume. Fear of depending on someone. Fear of being seen as broken. Fear of admitting that maybe, just maybe, I couldn't fix everything by myself. At 3 a.m., I found myself at the kitchen table with a pen and paper, trying to write down everything I could remember about Michael Chen. The list grew slowly, each memory feeling like excavating artifacts from a life that belonged to someone else. He always ordered his coffee black because he said sugar was unnecessary when you appreciated the complexity of the bitter. He had a scar on his left hand from helping his mother in her restaurant kitchen when he was 12. He laughed at his own jokes before telling them, like he couldn't contain his own amusement. He once spent an entire Saturday helping me paint my apartment, even though he was allergic to latex paint and his eyes watered the whole time. He told me I was beautiful when I was wearing paint-stained clothes and had my hair tied up with a rubber band. He said he loved me on a Tuesday morning in February, standing in my kitchen while I made scrambled eggs, like love was just another ingredient he was adding to breakfast. That last memory hit me like physical pain. I'd loved him back, completely, recklessly, with the kind of abandon that only comes when you're young enough to believe that love could conquer anything. But love hadn't conquered Emma's father's gambling addiction, or the bankruptcy that followed, or the depression that swallowed me whole after everyone I trusted disappeared from my life.
Emma stirred on the couch, mumbling something in her sleep, and I went to check on her. She'd kicked off her blanket, and as I tucked it back around her small body, she opened her eyes just enough to focus on me. "Mama, why are you awake?" "Just thinking, baby. Go back to sleep." "About the cookie man?" The cookie man. Even in her sleepy state, Emma had identified Michael by his kindness. "Maybe." "I like him," she said with the simple certainty of childhood. "He has gentle eyes." Gentle eyes. Yes, that was exactly right. Even in his expensive suits, even with the power to control my livelihood, Michael's eyes held the same gentleness I remembered from 5 years ago. The same careful attention to what I needed before I knew I needed it. But gentleness hadn't been enough before. When the world fell apart, gentle had felt inadequate against the brutal machinery of loss and financial ruin. I'd needed someone fierce, someone who would fight beside me instead of loving me from a careful distance. I'd needed someone who would stay when staying got ugly. Maybe that had been unfair. Maybe I'd expected Michael to be something he'd never claimed to be, a warrior instead of a lover, a savior instead of a partner. Maybe my own fear had been just as destructive as his, just dressed up in different clothes. The eviction notice seemed to pulse in the darkness, counting down to a crisis I still didn't know how to solve. 27 days to find $800, or 27 days to swallow my pride and accept help from a man who'd already disappeared from my life once. Is it possible to forgive someone for leaving you when you're not sure you can survive them leaving again? Thursday morning arrived with the cruel efficiency of all the days that had come before it, but everything felt different as I walked toward the office building where Michael's life existed 37 floors above mine. My cleaning cart rolled behind me like a confession of everything I'd lost, everything I'd become, everything I'd forgotten how to want. The elevator ride felt longer than usual, each floor marking another layer of the distance between who I was and who I'd been. The executive level still smelled like expensive coffee and quiet power, but now it also smelled like possibility, a scent I'd forgotten existed. Michael's office door stood open, but he wasn't there. His computer hummed quietly on his desk, and I found myself studying the space where he spent his days. The office was impeccably organized, but not sterile. A small succulent plant sat near his window, and there were photographs on his desk that I'd never allowed myself to look at closely before. My breath caught as I recognized the images. Emma's first steps, captured somehow when she was just over a year old. My college graduation, not the formal ceremony shot, but a candid moment of me laughing at something off camera. A picture of me sleeping on a park bench while Emma, barely 2, played in a sandbox nearby. I remembered that day, remembered being so exhausted that I dozed off during what was supposed to be a fun outing.
How had he gotten these photos? More importantly, why had he kept them? I never stopped watching over you. I spun around to find Michael in the doorway, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He looked different somehow, less carefully composed, more vulnerable. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, and his hair showed signs of being run through with worried fingers. "You've been stalking me for 5 years?" The accusation came out sharper than I'd intended. "I've been loving you for 5 years," he corrected quietly, setting the coffee cups on his desk. "There's a difference." "Is there?" I gestured at the photographs, at the evidence of surveillance disguised as affection. "These pictures, Michael, how did you—" "Mrs. Rodriguez," he said simply, "your neighbor. She's been my eyes and ears, making sure you and Emma were safe, making sure you had help when you needed it, even if you didn't know it was coming from me." The world tilted slightly. Mrs. Rodriguez, who always seemed to have extra groceries she needed help finishing? Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd never asked for payment for watching Emma? Mrs. Rodriguez, who somehow always knew when our utilities were about to be shut off and would appear with exactly the right amount of cash, claiming she'd won a small lottery scratcher? "You've been paying my bills." It wasn't a question. "I've been trying to keep you afloat without taking away your dignity," he said, and the distinction mattered more than I wanted to admit. There's a difference between helping and rescuing. I was trying to help. I sank into the chair across from his desk, the weight of 5 years of hidden kindness settling on my shoulders like a blanket I'd never known I was wearing. "Why?" "Because I left you when you needed me most," he said, coming around the desk to kneel beside my chair. "Because every night for 5 years, I've gone to sleep knowing I failed the most important person in my world. Because love doesn't stop just because you're too much of a coward to face it." His proximity made it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to maintain the careful distance I'd built around my heart. "I don't know how to accept this." "You don't have to accept anything," he said, "but I need you to understand something. The eviction notice, the $800 you need, that's not charity. That's me trying to fix a mistake I made 5 years ago. That's me trying to give you the stability you should have had all along if I'd been brave enough to stay." Tears I'd been holding back for days finally spilled over, hot and sudden and unstoppable. "I'm not the same person you fell in love with." "I know," he said gently, reaching up to brush tears from my cheek. "You're stronger now, more beautiful, more real. You've survived things that would have broken the woman I knew before, and somehow you've kept your heart soft enough to raise a daughter who sees the world as a place worth being gentle in." "I'm afraid," I whispered, the admission scraping my throat raw.
Of what? That you'll leave again. That Emma will love you and you'll decide we're too complicated, too broken, too much trouble. That I'll let myself need you and you'll remember why you walked away the first time. Michael's hands framed my face with a tenderness that felt like coming home to a place I'd forgotten existed. "I'm not going anywhere, Sarah. Not this time. Not ever again. You want to know why I had your pictures? Because every day I looked at them and reminded myself what I was fighting to deserve again. Every business decision, every success, every dollar I made was me trying to become the man who could stand beside you and never make you question whether you were worth staying for." The kiss that followed was salt and tears and 5 years of regret transformed into something that tasted like possibility, like forgiveness, like the beginning of a story I'd stopped believing could have a happy ending.
When we broke apart, I was breathing hard, and the office around us seemed charged with electricity. "The eviction notice," I said. "Already taken care of," he replied. "Your rent is paid through the end of the year. But more than that," he paused, studying my face, "I want you to come work for me, not cleaning offices, using that brilliant mind that dreamed up Sarah Hartley events. Help me plan the company retreat, the executive dinners, the celebrations that matter. Let me help you build the business you wanted." The offer hung in the air between us like a bridge I was afraid to cross. "And if it doesn't work out, between us, I mean, then you'll still have your business," he said simply, "because some things are more important than my feelings. Your success, Emma's security, your independence, those things matter more than whether I get a second chance at loving you the way you deserve." For the first time in 5 years, I allowed myself to imagine a future that looked like more than just survival. It was terrifying and wonderful, and absolutely terrifying again, but it was possible. And possibility, I was remembering, was where all the best love stories began. Emma's excitement was infectious as she bounced in the back seat of Michael's car, her small hands pressed against the window as we drove through the upscale neighborhood where our new apartment waited. The eviction notice that had haunted my nightmares for weeks was now just a crumpled piece of paper in my purse, a reminder of how quickly everything could change when someone decided you were worth saving. "Mama, look at all the trees." Emma's voice carried the pure joy of a child who'd spent most of her life in concrete spaces. "Are there squirrels? Can we feed them?" "We'll see, baby," I said, but I was smiling as I said it. When had I last smiled without effort, without forcing my facial muscles into an arrangement that might fool the world into thinking I was okay? Michael glanced at me from the driver's seat, and something in his expression made my chest tight with emotions I was still learning to name again. "The apartment comes with a small balcony," he said to Emma, "perfect for watching squirrels. And birds?" "Definitely birds." The building was nothing like the cramped complex we'd been forced to leave. Glass and steel reached toward a sky that looked impossibly blue, and the lobby smelled like fresh flowers instead of industrial disinfectant and other people's struggles. The elevator was smooth and quiet, nothing like the grinding, uncertain mechanism in our old building that sometimes trapped residents between floors. "16th floor," Michael said as we rose, and I tried to process the fact that Emma and I were about to live higher above the ground than I'd ever imagined possible. The apartment took my breath away. Sunlight streamed through windows that faced east, promising mornings that would begin with hope instead of the harsh buzz of fluorescent lights. The kitchen was small but functional, with counter space enough for Emma to do homework while I cooked actual meals, instead of assembling whatever was cheapest at the grocery store. But it was Emma's reaction that broke me open. She stood in the center of the living room, turning in slow circles, her arms outstretched like she was trying to embrace all the space around her. "Mama, I can run in here," she said. And then she did, pure, unself-conscious joy propelling her in circles around the room. "I can run and I won't hit anything." The tears came without warning, 5 years of holding them back suddenly pointless in the face of my daughter's happiness. I'd given her so little space to be a child, so few opportunities to run and play and take up room in the world without worrying about disturbing neighbors or breaking things we couldn't afford to replace. Michael's hand found my shoulder, steady and warm. "She's beautiful when she's happy," he said quietly. "She's always beautiful," I replied, but I knew what he meant. There was something luminous about Emma when she felt safe enough to be fully herself, something that had been dimmed by too many months of uncertainty and spaces too small for a growing girl's dreams. "The bedroom has built-in bookshelves," Michael said, leading us down a short hallway. "I thought Emma might like to have her own library." Emma gasped when she saw the room, not large, but filled with afternoon light and possibility. The bookshelves were empty, waiting to be filled, and there was space for a real bed instead of the fold-out couch that had served as her bedroom for the past 2 years. "Can I really have all these books?" she asked, running her fingers along the empty shelves with reverence. "As many as you want," Michael said. And I saw him through Emma's eyes then. Not the powerful businessman who controlled my survival, but simply a kind man who understood that children needed space for their imaginations to grow. That evening, after Emma had fallen asleep in her new room, surrounded by the 3 books we owned, Michael and I sat on the small balcony with cups of coffee that tasted like luxury after years of instant. The city spread below us, lights twinkling like earthbound stars, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, the future felt like something I could touch. "I have something for you," he said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Consider it a signing bonus." Inside was a check made out to Sarah Hartley Events, more money than I'd seen in one place since before Emma's father left. But more than the amount, it was the name on the check that made my hands shake. Sarah Hartley Events. He'd remembered my dream down to the exact name I'd chosen years ago. "Michael, I can't." "You can," he said firmly, "and you will. Because tomorrow you're going to start building the business you always wanted, and you're going to be brilliant at it, and Emma's going to grow up watching her mother create beautiful moments for other people." The tears came again, but they were different now. Not the desperate tears of someone drowning, but the overwhelming emotions of someone who'd been thrown a lifeline and was finally brave enough to grab hold. "What if I fail?" I whispered. "Then you'll try again," he said simply. "But you won't fail, Sarah. You're not the same person who was afraid to dream 5 years ago. You're someone who survived the impossible and kept her daughter safe and whole. You're someone who worked 3 jobs and never lost her capacity for kindness. You're someone who deserves every beautiful thing this world has to offer." I looked at him in the soft light of the city night, this man who'd loved me through my worst moments without asking for anything in return, and felt something shift in my chest. Not the desperate gratitude of someone being rescued, but the quiet recognition of someone being seen, truly seen, for exactly who they were. "I love you," I said, the words surprising us both. "Not because you saved us, not because of the apartment or the money or the second chance. I love you because you never stopped believing in the person I was before the world tried to convince me she didn't exist." His kiss tasted like coming home, like forgiveness, like the beginning of a story I was finally ready to believe could have a happy ending. 3 weeks into my new life, I woke to the sound of Emma laughing, not the careful, quiet laughter of a child who'd learned to take up as little space as possible, but the full-throated joy of someone who felt safe enough to be loud. She was on the balcony, still in her pajamas, feeding crackers to a family of squirrels who'd apparently adopted her as their personal breakfast service. "Mama, look, the daddy squirrel remembers me," she called, her face radiant with the simple pleasure of being noticed by creatures who asked nothing of her except consistency. I stood in the doorway watching her, coffee growing cold in my hands, marveling at how quickly children adapted to happiness when given the chance. Emma had bloomed in these 3 weeks, like a flower that had been waiting years for the right amount of sunlight. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "First client meeting at 10. You've got this. M." Sarah Hartley Events had its first real client today, a pharmaceutical company's annual gala that would either establish my reputation or destroy it before it had a chance to grow. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of cleaning up after other people's success, I was about to create my own. The meeting was held in a conference room that still smelled like the expensive coffee I used to serve in my other life. 3 executives sat across from me, 2 men and a woman, all perfectly pressed and professionally skeptical. I recognized the look in their eyes. They were wondering if the woman who used to empty their trash cans could possibly understand the intricacies of corporate event planning.
"Miss Hartley," the woman began, consulting her tablet with the efficiency of someone who measured conversations in billable minutes. "Mr. Chen speaks very highly of your capabilities, but I have to ask about your experience with events of this magnitude." The old Sarah would have crumbled under that barely concealed doubt. The old Sarah would have apologized for taking up their time and backed out gracefully, convinced she was reaching for something beyond her grasp. But this Sarah had spent 5 years learning that survival was the ultimate form of project management. This Sarah had juggled 3 jobs, a small child, and an endless series of crises while never letting anyone see her break. This Sarah had organizational skills forged in the fire of necessity and creativity born from making something beautiful out of nothing. "You want to know about my experience?" I asked, setting down my portfolio with the confidence of someone who'd earned every page inside it. "I've managed simultaneous schedules across 3 different employers while ensuring my daughter never missed a meal, a bath, or a bedtime story. I've created memorable experiences with budgets that would make your interns weep. I've solved problems you didn't even know you had, while wearing a smile that convinced everyone around me that everything was exactly as it should be." The room went quiet, and I saw something shift in their faces. Recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of respect. "Your pharmaceutical gala needs to accomplish several goals," I continued, opening my portfolio to reveal months of research I'd conducted in stolen moments between shifts. "You want to celebrate last year's achievements, build excitement for upcoming product launches, and strengthen relationships with key stakeholders. But more than that, you want people to leave feeling inspired about the work they do, remembering why they chose to dedicate their careers to improving people's lives." I walked them through my proposal, an evening built around the theme of healing journeys, with patient stories woven throughout the program, interactive displays showcasing research breakthroughs, and a surprise element I'd been perfecting for weeks, a live performance by a children's choir from a local hospital singing songs of hope and resilience. By the time I finished presenting, the skepticism had transformed into something that looked remarkably like excitement. "This is," the woman paused, searching for words, "this is exactly what we wanted but couldn't articulate." "When can you start?" one of the men asked. "I already have," I replied, and it was true. Sarah Hartley events had been building in my mind for years, waiting for the moment when I was brave enough to let it exist in the world. Walking out of that conference room, contract signed and deposit check in hand, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Emma was born. Pride in my own accomplishments. Not the desperate pride of making it through another day, but the quiet satisfaction of doing something well, something that mattered, something that was mine. I called Michael from the elevator, my voice shaking with emotions I couldn't quite name. "How did it go?" he asked, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I think I just remembered who I used to be," I said, "and I think I like who I'm becoming even more." "I never forgot," he replied. "I've been waiting 5 years for the world to see what I always knew was there." That evening, Emma helped me create my first official client file, carefully writing Pharmaceutical Gala on a folder tab with the serious concentration she brought to all important tasks. As we worked together at our kitchen table in our apartment, building our future, I realized that this was what healing looked like. Not the dramatic transformation of a movie montage, but the quiet, daily choice to believe in tomorrow, to invest in dreams, to trust that love could create something more beautiful than survival. 6 months later, I stood in the ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel, watching 300 pharmaceutical executives and their guests move through the evening I'd created. The children's choir from the hospital was on stage, their voices lifting in a song about hope that had most of the audience in tears, and I felt a satisfaction so profound it was almost spiritual. Emma sat at a small table near the back, her homework spread before her, but her eyes were wide with wonder at the transformed space around her. Fairy lights hung like captured stars from the ceiling, and patient stories were displayed on elegant stands throughout the room, each one a reminder of why the work these people did mattered. "Mama, you made this?" she whispered when I stopped by her table. "We made this, baby," I corrected, because Emma had been my sounding board for every idea, my motivation for every late night of planning, my reminder that beautiful things were worth creating even when, especially when, the world felt dark. Michael appeared at my elbow, handsome in his black tie, but I barely noticed the formal attire.
What I saw was the man who'd believed in me when I'd forgotten how to believe in myself, who'd given me the space to rebuild without trying to control the construction. "The client wants to book you for next year's event," he said, his voice warm with pride, "and 3 other companies have asked for your card." I should have been celebrating, should have been focused on the success blooming around me like flowers after a long winter, but something nagged at the edges of my consciousness, a loose thread in the fabric of my new life that I couldn't quite identify. The answer came during the evening's final presentation, when the pharmaceutical company's CEO took the stage to announce their new initiative, a foundation dedicated to providing free medications to families who couldn't afford them. As he spoke about dignity and access and the belief that financial circumstances shouldn't determine whether someone received life-saving treatment, I found myself thinking about Mrs. Rodriguez. Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd helped with Emma for years without payment. Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd always seemed to have extra groceries or cash from lucky lottery tickets. Mrs. Rodriguez, who Michael had admitted was his eyes and ears, his way of helping me without taking away my dignity. But Mrs. Rodriguez, I realized with a clarity that took my breath away, was diabetic. I'd seen her checking her blood sugar, noticed her careful attention to what she ate, observed her taking medications that I'd never thought to question the cost of. Michael had been paying for more than my utilities and emergency expenses. He'd been covering Mrs. Rodriguez's medical bills, ensuring that the woman who helped care for Emma could afford to care for herself. When I confronted him about it later, after the event had ended successfully and Emma was asleep in her new bed surrounded by the library we'd been building together, he didn't deny it. "She refused to take money for watching Emma," he said quietly. We were on our balcony again. The city lights spread below us like a promise of all the good things that were possible when people chose to care for each other. But I knew she was struggling with her medical expenses. It seemed like a fair trade. She took care of what mattered most to me, and I made sure she could take care of herself. "You've been playing guardian angel to half the neighborhood, haven't you?" "Just the people who were taking care of you," he said. And the simplicity of it, the absolute logic of loving someone by loving everyone who loved them, made my chest tight with emotions I was still learning to navigate. "Michael, what we have, is it built on you rescuing me? Because I need to know that this is real, that it's not just gratitude dressed up as love." He turned to face me fully, his hands framing my face with the gentleness that had become as familiar as breathing. "What we have is built on you being extraordinary," he said. "What we have is built on me recognizing that you were the strongest person I'd ever known, even when you felt like you were falling apart. What we have is built on 5 years of me learning that love isn't about rescuing anyone. It's about showing up, consistently, especially when showing up is complicated." The kiss that followed tasted like truth, like the end of questioning whether I deserved happiness, and the beginning of simply accepting it as something that belonged to me. "I have something to tell you," I said when we broke apart. "What?" "I'm happy," I said, and the words felt strange in my mouth, not because happiness was foreign, but because it was so complete, so uncomplicated by the fear and struggle that had defined it for so long. For the first time in years, I'm just happy. "Good," he said, pulling me closer. "You deserve to be happy. You've always deserved to be happy." As I fell asleep that night, Emma breathing peacefully in the next room, and Michael's arm around me like a promise that morning would bring more goodness than I'd learned to expect, I realized that healing wasn't a destination you arrived at. It was a daily choice to trust that love could be stable, that success could last, that people could stay, even when staying got complicated. Tomorrow, I would wake up and continue building Sarah Hartley events. Tomorrow, Emma would feed squirrels on the balcony and do her homework at a kitchen table that belonged to us. Tomorrow, Michael would go to work knowing that the people he loved were safe and cared for and thriving. Tomorrow would be another day in a life I'd stopped believing was possible, and that felt like the most beautiful miracle of all. 1 year later, I stood in the bathroom of our new house, not apartment, house,
watching Emma brush her teeth in a sink that belonged to us. The morning light streamed through windows that faced a backyard where she could run without worrying about disturbing neighbors, where she'd planted a small garden that was now producing tomatoes she was inordinately proud of. "Mama, are you coming to my school presentation today?" she asked, her mouth full of toothpaste foam. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, because I could say that now. Because Sarah Hartley Events had grown from one pharmaceutical gala to a business that employed 4 people and allowed me to choose which events to accept. Because I could attend my daughter's school presentations without having to choose between her happiness and our survival. The presentation was about heroes, and Emma had chosen to write about me, not because I'd saved anyone or done anything particularly dramatic, but because, in her words, my mama never gave up even when everything was scary. Sitting in that elementary school classroom, surrounded by other parents who'd never had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries, I felt the full weight of how far we'd traveled from that night when I'd found the eviction notice taped to our door. Michael was there too, in the back row, his face soft with the kind of love that had learned to be patient, to be consistent, to be present for the small moments that made up a life. He'd asked me to marry him 3 weeks ago, not with a grand gesture or dramatic proposal, but while we were doing dishes together after dinner, Emma's laughter drifting in from the living room where she was building elaborate structures with blocks. "I want to spend the rest of my life doing ordinary things with you," he'd said, his hands sudsy from washing plates. "I want to argue about whose turn it is to take out the trash and watch Emma grow up and grow old, knowing that every single day I chose you and you chose me back." I'd said yes while holding a dish towel, and it had felt perfect, not because it was romantic, but because it was real. Because love, I'd learned, wasn't about grand gestures or fairy tale moments. It was about showing up every day and choosing each other through ordinary Tuesday mornings and difficult conversations and the endless small decisions that built a life together. After Emma's presentation, the 3 of us walked home through our neighborhood, tree-lined streets where Emma could ride her bike, and children played in yards that weren't measured in square footage but in possibility. Our house sat on a corner lot, modest but ours, with a front porch where Michael and I spent evenings planning our future while Emma practiced cartwheels on the grass. "I have news," I told them as we climbed the front steps. "Sarah Hartley Events just got asked to plan the governor's inaugural ball." Emma whooped with excitement, and Michael swept me into a kiss that tasted like pride and partnership and the kind of love that celebrated your victories as if they were his own. "How does it feel?" he asked when he set me down. "Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," I replied, and meant it completely. That evening, after Emma was asleep and Michael was reviewing contracts at the kitchen table that had become the headquarters of our shared life, I found myself in her room, watching her sleep in the bed that would never be taken away, in the house that would never be foreclosed on, in the life that would never again be defined by the fear of losing everything. The photograph that had started this whole journey back to myself sat on Emma's nightstand now. That young woman in the cap and gown, holding her baby, smiling like the future was full of infinite possibility. But I no longer looked at her with the ache of loss. She was still here, still part of me, just older and wiser and braver than she'd ever imagined she could be. Michael appeared in the doorway, drawn by some instinct that told him I needed company for this moment of reflection. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. "Only one," I said. "I regret how long it took me to believe I deserved this happiness." "Time doesn't matter," he replied, slipping his arms around me from behind. "What matters is that you're here now. What matters is that Emma will grow up knowing her mother fought for their life together and won. What matters is that tomorrow we get to wake up and choose each other again." I leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid reality of him, the warmth that had become as necessary as breathing. "I love you," I whispered, not because I hadn't said it before, but because some truths needed to be spoken regularly, like prayers or promises or reminders of what made life worth living. "I love you too," he whispered back. I love you, and I love Emma, and I love the life we've built together. I love the ordinary magic of grocery shopping together and the extraordinary beauty of watching you create celebrations for other people. I love that you've taught me that love isn't about rescue, it's about recognition. Recognizing that someone is worth staying for, worth fighting for, worth building a life around.
As we stood there in our daughter's room, in our house, in our life that had been rebuilt from ash and hope and the radical decision to believe in tomorrow, I understood something fundamental about love stories. They're not about finding someone who completes you. They're about finding someone who sees you completely, your strength and your struggles, your dreams and your fears, your past and your potential, and chooses to build something beautiful with all of those pieces. This story began with an eviction notice and a forgotten photograph. It ends with a family, a thriving business, and the knowledge that sometimes the most powerful love stories are the ones where two broken people heal together, creating something stronger and more beautiful than any could have built alone. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever doubted that your story could have a happy ending, if you've ever wondered whether someone out there sees your worth even when you can't see it yourself, I hope our story reminds you that love has a way of finding us exactly when we need it most, even when we've forgotten how to look for it. Sometimes the people who save us are the ones who never left, even when we couldn't see them waiting in the wings. Sometimes healing happens not in dramatic moments, but in the quiet accumulation of days when someone chooses to stay. And sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that begin with the simple recognition that you are worth fighting for. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances, third chances, and the infinite possibility of love that refuses to give up. Share your own story of unexpected hope in the comments below, because every one of us has moments when we needed someone to believe in us before we could believe in ourselves. And don't forget to subscribe, because the world needs more stories about people who choose love over fear, who choose to stay over walking away, who choose to build something beautiful even when everything around them seems broken. Thank you for taking this journey with us, thank you for believing in happy endings, and thank you for remembering that your own story is still being written, and the best chapters might be the ones you haven't imagined yet.